ho haig de comentar o és part de la...
El primer va ser una dieta de llera.
Welcome to our first experiment of the SIBECOL dialogues on current topics on ecology. You know, SIBECOL is the Spanish Iberian Society for Ecology. And the idea of this kind of event is to give opportunity and space to very freely talk about some ecological issues that are transversal across the different types of ecosystem, both aquatic, terrestrial, even aerial probably. We are very trained to make seminars in conferences in the different centers about the specific topics that mostly are reflecting our own research. But eventually, the main debate around this is about how we obtain the data, how we interpret them. And I think we don't have too many spaces to talk about the general issues on ecology. And this is very important, both for people that are starting to work on ecology, as for those people that have more time to have thinking about this and have more experience. So this is the idea of this time, 1 hour and some more time for receive questions from you, some of them by the chat. And the topic that we selected for this is about heat waves that is related to the new climatic change scenario, not necessarily because heat waves may have happened many times along the ecological history of the Earth. But obviously this is present in our life as far as we suffer and we provoke this climatic change. But and that arises the point about if these changes that we are promoting through climatic change are leading the ecological systems to tipping points and then alternative states. So we put together both ideas here to freely discuss. And the people invited to talk about this are Doctora Núria Marvà from Mallorca, from the Medea, and Jordi Catalán. He's working on CREAF, in the CREAF, and Yolanda Puello, that she's working in the IP, the ACSIC Center in Zaragoza, but she could not come by personal reasons. So what we propose to you is that I will take the role of Yolanda Puello, and my previous role as a moderator will be shifted to Jordi Martínez Vilalta, that is also working with me here in the CREAF and the University Autónoma of Barcelona, that is hosting this event, and we are really appreciated for this effort. And just only just to note also that this event is part of the events that are planned to be done in the Ecology Day. That is an initiative of different ecological societies around these dates in September, just to promote different kinds of experience events about ecology. So I think that it's time to give the room to Jordi as a moderator. Now I shift my role here.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, welcome everyone, both here physically and also remotely. As Francisco Lloret introduced, this is this first dialogue in ecology promoted by SIBECOL. We hope it will be the first of a series of dialogues. And I think that the topic we have today is quite timely, and because one of the strengths, I think, of the panel we have is the diversity of disciplines within ecology they represent, and this is, of course, by design. I would like to start this dialogue by asking them, how is this topic, in particular tipping points, no? The fact that ecosystems might change dramatically at certain times and places, how is this approached in your different disciplines? And of course the idea will be to find some common ground. You know? Do we see commonalities between terrestrial, freshwater or marine systems? But probably before entering this, we need to know a bit more about how this is studied in each of the systems by themselves. So I will ask first Jordi Catalán to see how they see it.
So my hat here is as a limnologist, And limnology have, particularly lake studies, have a long tradition to link theory with observation. And also for reasons of water quality, there are relatively long time series, which is the first you need. You need a time series to study the dynamics of an ecosystem. So in that way, limnology, particularly lake ecosystems, or could be considered a paradigmatic case for tipping points. Not necessarily for heat waves, but for tipping points. And these have taken advantage of, as I mentioned it, of the long time series. And long time series means, half a century or so. And if possible, monthly measurements of many variables during half a century. In that sense, the ecosystem approach is possible, and you can select some state variables representing this ecosystem. Then there are other examples that are not strictly related to ecosystems, but to populations or some particular organisms specifically or especially sensitive to heat waves. And that will be another issue. So, we can discuss about tipping points as alternative states of an ecosystem, or we can be more flexible and consider nonlinear behaviors related to the effects of heat waves. And I think this will increase the examples and also be closer to the reality. Because in some way the theory of alternative states, it's a theory, a mathematical theory in many aspects, but not necessarily exactly adjusting to any of the cases that it happens. We can develop these aspects, what is a tipping point or not, later. But I think the main contribution of limnology is to provide examples of ecosystems or real ecosystems with a lot of data.
But sorry, before we jump to the marine ecosystems, because my impression is that many of the empirical examples that we have of alternative states and tipping points, at least originally, came from freshwater ecosystems. Is this also your impression, or I'm asking again you? Sorry, Jordi.
Sorry.
So
I thought you were asking.
Just to have this area covered before we jump into a different system.
No, when you consider in a flexible way the examples, I think that related to heat wave, the most exciting cases are from marine systems. She will explain that they have beautiful examples. We were joking with her at the beginning because, aquatic limnology, aquatic ecology have a black and white movies, which is limnology, and full color movies that are marine systems. Everything is bigger, larger organism, more beautiful color. In freshwater, everything is small, not so beautiful, but it's small, and this is amenable to study real, complex communities, biogeochemical cycles in a more easy way. In that sense, it also happens with terrestrial ecosystems. But now technology have changed that in favor of terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Sorry.
No. In fact, that's the way I was referring generally about tipping points and the fact that your systems tend to be more constrained. That was the reason I was asking. But anyway, let's jump to the more colorful seawater ecosystems, and then we can come back to the examples in limnology. So, Nuria, it's your turn now.
Yeah, the colorful, it depends where, but yeah, I agree that there are areas that are colorful, others are a bit more gray. But yeah, in the I think the issue about the time series is very important. In the marine systems, the time series, we don't have this 50 years, so if we have 20 years, it's already a lot. So, and this is crucial to assess the tipping point issue. But yeah, well, and there is work being done looking at tipping points in relation also of the shifts in the habitat, or also, well, just because of an impact to the habitat, the species that are creating the habitat, but also through the interactions that are all the trophic chain that it's affecting the habitat and the ecosystem. And then, yeah, now because the heat waves, it's really a big issue in the marine, well, I think in the planet in general, but it's also very evident in the sea. And we have really very recurrent episodes of extreme temperatures in the water, and this is actually changing the ecosystems quite severely. So, yeah, there is, in the marine realm, there is quite a lot of focus on assessing, critical temperatures, driving then really shifts in the different ecosystems. Well, I'm coming from the coastal area, so the evidences I know more, it's, well, corals or gorgonians, that's the Cnidarian, but also vegetation, vegetated habitats like kelps or seagrasses that are really changing.
So are there examples of really tipping points that have been observed and at small scales, at regional scale? So what is the...
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, in related with marine heat waves, for instance, with excessive temperature for a period of time, there are evidences, well, for instance, in Australia, in the Great Barrier Reef, after, I think there have been several summers with heat waves, but, well, there was one in 2016, but before also, and then actually, big areas, large areas at kilometers, several kilometers scale, the reefs were damaged, and then they take time to recover. A similar, also there was another, this affected the Western Australia, but also really almost the entire coast, and it affected coral. This was in the summer. Of course, there they have summer in in our winter. So that was in late 2010 and 2011, and it affected coral reefs, but also kelps and also seagrasses. There were, in Shark Bay, that is an area that it's an heritage of a world heritage of seagrass bed, that it's the largest in the world and so on, and this was really, really, really damaged. And also in the Mediterranean, we have also evidence that of massive mortalities of gorgonians, also sponges, red algae, seagrasses. It's not massive loss, but it's that we are losing abundance. Also after heat waves in several summers, since 2020, to the beginning of this century up to now. So, there are several examples.
Thank you. And what about terrestrial systems, Paco?
I think, I agree absolutely. Yes, to document the tipping points, we need enough time to check it, because you need the state before something and the state afterwards. So the need for long-term information is key, and probably the not the best, but the better documented situation is when we have historical registers, particularly with palynological records, for instance, and that's interesting. We can talk about later, because that brings us to the question about the the temporal scale at which we define or we describe the tipping points. There are some other cases, but note that in many cases the terrestrial ecosystems are not so dynamical that aquatic systems, by theoretical reasons and physiological reasons and functional reasons. But if we think about forest, tree lives for a long time, and that gives them opportunities to, in many cases, survive a single event of a heat wave, of an extreme of climate. And so the response is some way buffered by the own structure and the reserves and the functioning. That is not the same, probably, when you have a system in which the units are short-lived, like phytoplankton, for instance. Another issue is about the link between the tipping points and the heat waves. And that's also, well, if we assume the terrestrial ecosystem are mostly driven by plants, not by animals. This is assumption, because of course animals are very important. They are regulating the world system, etc., etc. But if we focus on plants, heat wave by itself it may be important, but it is particularly when combined with availability of water, because it's the combination of water and temperatures that importantly regulates the function of the vegetals. Of course, nutrients, radiation are important as far, but we are talking now about the climate. So the point moves if we have evidence about the combination of heat waves and drought it's producing, we have evidence of tipping points. We have some of them, but not very much. I will say that not very much that we could say well documented. For instance, I can give some examples. One example is the case of the Sahel in the Sahara, that in the last half of the past century, let me not be very precise with the dates, there was a period of really important drought that spanned for several years. And the result was a loss of vegetation cover. And in fact, afterwards, when the rain came back, the vegetation has not been recovered in the same sense that was. For me, this is a very clear example in which that may occur. Another issue that is important when we talk about terrestrial ecosystems, not only forest, is that they are very related with the human society. Of course, we also depend on running water, freshwater water, and the seas, but we are terrestrial organisms. And probably this is the reason in which our impact on terrestrial ecosystem is more evident, because we are terrestrial. So I think that we realize in these tipping points, particularly because they are affecting the human societies, that bring us the opportunity to scale up the concept of the ecosystem to these socio-ecological systems. And the case of the Sahara or the Sub-Sahara is a very nice example, because we realized that because at that time it was impacting even the Western societies about the famine that people living there were. So there has very important social implications. And I think that this is also a point to take on mind, that of course the effects, the impacts of these events in aquatic ecosystems revert to the humans. But perhaps in terrestrial ecosystems, we are particularly aware when the societies are impacted.
Okay, something that came to my mind while listening to your answers is, how do we exactly define tipping points? In the sense, what is needed for us to call something a tipping point? And this is related to something you said, Jordi, at the beginning. Is it the mortality of an important species in the community enough to call an episode a tipping point? Do we need it to be the dominant species? Do we need to define it at the level of the ecosystem properly? So do we need a system properly that really changes dramatically and doesn't come back? At what scale? So I know these are many questions, but I have the feeling that we are not always talking exactly about the same, and probably if we want to find common ground between different subsystems of our planet, it's probably good to discuss a bit about this.
Yes. Well, may I start? Yeah. Well, tipping points really is related to the alternative state theory. But then we have words as thresholds or, well, nonlinear changes, nonlinear responses. So any of these theories, for instance, the percolation theory, that you accumulate gaps and at the end you have an event that changes the things. All these theories use state variables, but and then we need to choose in practice. We need to choose these state variables of the ecosystem. For instance, in planktonic systems, chlorophyll, the total chlorophyll, which is it's a quite useful measure in small aquatic ecosystems. Oxygen levels also is quite useful. In cases of many species, just make some characterization of the communities and well, have an index of change of the community, and you follow that. So at the end, well, you have to connect some measurable variable with the theory. Once you do that, then how you can say that you are reaching a tipping point. So the criteria, or what differentiates the tipping point from other nonlinear changes is precisely the capacity of recovery, or the progressive decline in the capacity of recovery, or the hysteresis of the system. And in principle, at the tipping point, you have zero resilience, zero capacity of recovery. But you do not reach this point suddenly. You reach this point progressively. So anytime you are submitted to a perturbation, or even it's not necessarily perturbation, it could be within a trend, a warming trend, for instance, because heating wave, maybe we can consider something of days, weeks, but the warming of the planet is also a heating wave. We are heating up the whole planet for centuries probably. So within this progressive trend of the driver, then the resilience or the capacity of recovery is declining. So what is called the critical slowing down. Yeah, sorry. The critical is slowing down. So that is one of the theoretical issues that define a tipping point. But are other changes that not necessarily are in that way, that are also quite interesting. Changes, and I think also in some way is a matter of scale, because what you were talking about, the changes in vegetation, one a broad scale, one tremendous change is around the mid-Holocene, so 5,000 years ago. Europe and northern hemisphere changed completely the vegetation. And for instance, in the case of the Pyrenees here, we had the change of a lot of broadleaf trees towards fir and beech. But this occurred progressively. But when you look at detail, so if you look at the scale of the whole Holocene, this could be considered a tipping point, because you see something like that. But when you look closer, you see that this advance or this change was in steps during periods of cold climate, because there were changes in climate, not in weather, cold climate. But and the point was that at each step, when the conditions were recovered, there was not a way back. So the invading species were gaining in each step, in each cold event, were gaining space, and at the end there was a change in the aspect of the landscape. They become dominant. But if you ask when become dominant, well, it's not really a tipping point. but at the scale of 10,000 years is the tipping point. So I think that here we enter the matter of scale and all these things. For people interested in the real world, I think to discuss too much about the theory of if it's this really an alternative states or not, it's difficult to define also states, the ecological states, because sometimes in the case of terrestrial ecosystems or some large where you have engineering species, well, basically it's the dynamics of that species that define the system.
Well, you see a lot of very interesting things, but one point just to launch is that brings us the question about how to link the theory and the practical. For instance, it's really useful if eventually we cannot apply the theoretical principles in ecology to the real world. But this is something I launch for people to think about. I have not a clear answer. For me, yeah, it is interesting because at some extent it is the reason we are here. So that justifies something. But a key issue is this scale. And yes, something that I was thinking that in many cases. Well, we often use the spatiotemporal scale as an excuse to say, okay, this is my scale. This is what I'm doing here. I'm not interested in what is happening at the broader or finer scale. And okay, that may be useful to publish your research at some time, but it's just escaping from the reality, because the reality is multi-scale. And we know that this is part of the background of the ecologists, but my question is, we really integrate this reality of the world in our thinking? And this is the case of the tipping point is clear, because it may happen at some scale or not at another scale, but the process is over there. So it's not a question just to avoid the reality, to focus on my own research, but to be aware of the world and try to afford this. And for these cases, the theory is important. And just another issue, that this is not a question of only of a spatiotemporal scale. This is also a question of organizational scale. In the classical or the functional scale is of course all of them are related, but this is important, and this is related with the definition of the state of the state variables that Jordi was talking about.
And, I found also very interesting this about the scales. Sorry. Okay. So about how to define the tipping, well, depending on the scale, the temporal scale, you can detect one tipping point or another one. Back to the ocean. Okay, the heat waves are defined for a very short time scale. So a marine heat wave is defined as the temperature that is for a particular day, for particular days, that exceeds the 19th percentile of the average temperature for 30 years, and if this excess temperature is maintained for at least 5 days. So with this, you also can attribute a shift or some big change in the ecosystem, the habitat or the communities or whatever. The key thing is if this can be recovered or not. And so, it seems that at the short, these decadal time scales we are looking at, that okay, this can be sustained sometimes and it cannot recover. But then looking at also, not just focusing on heat waves, there is the warming trend that it's going on, and in the Mediterranean and other areas in the planet that it's quite fast. And we have here in the Mediterranean the issue about the tropicalization, that it's more slow thing that maybe after in some centuries we may have completely a different Mediterranean, like similar what Jordi was mentioning. So I think it's really relevant, the scales, the temporal.
Yeah, coming back to my first argument, to the previous argument, just with two examples. So we can afford the issue as to how define the scale in which tipping points arise, but we can address the question about how tipping points scale up or scale down across scales. This is what I mean. Because we can say, okay, I'm going to check tipping points at a decadal scale, of a yearly scale. Okay, there is not happening. Okay, this is a way to address the question. But the other question is to understand how are the mechanisms that make that the tipping point appears at some given scale, at remains or not throw up. Because that led us to investigate, to think about the mechanism. And some of the mechanisms move across the temporal and scales. So they are linked. So the easy way is to say, okay, I'm checking the tipping point at the regional scale. It happens, it not happens. But the point is, for me, the more challenging, I have no solution, is to think about how tipping points scale up or scale down.
Can continue with that in a different way?
Yes.
Yes.
You already raised basically all the points I wanted to introduce.
The format is a dialogue, so yeah.
It will be different from what was said. He was talking about mechanisms, and sometimes, for instance, when we say hysteresis or resilience, what we mean with that, this is a concept. But at the end, behind this resilience, there are mechanisms. And in different systems, these mechanisms are different. But they go from seed reservoirs, for instance, water reservoirs in the soils, nutrient cycling, I think there are two types of mechanisms providing resilience. One is the deposits, the things that are accumulated, and it's your money in the bank, and you can just draw some money every week. But if you do not replace them, then there is a point it's exhausted. So the resilience disappears. And the other mechanisms are the processes that are faster. For instance, all the microbial activity. The microbial activity is sometimes what is provided, for instance, in planktonic systems or aquatic systems, on lakes, the resilience or the feedbacks to the trend. In this case, will be perturbations or any change. And in some way, responding to your question, the scaling up is basically is one thing that is acting as the state variable at one level, is acting as the hysteresis provider at another level. So you have these connections of mechanisms, or if you want, small wheels and large wheels that are connected, and this characterize the dynamics. Another interesting issue connected to that is because we can recognize the tipping points, but afterwards, and the interesting issue is to predict or warn about a potential tipping point, and this issue of the critical slowing down, translated in analyzing a time series, can be addressed in the way that the variation in the time series changes. So it's not only that you change from one state to another the whole distribution of probabilities, but in the way from one place to the other, there is a change also in how the system varies. And basically, what the theory says or suggests is that an increase in correlation. So there is an increase in variation, so you can have the mean stable, but there is an increase in variation, but also in the correlation of this variation. So if you have one point in the time series of high values, the probability of another time of high values increases, and if you have low values, the probability of low values increases. And if you enter in this regime of variation, which I think is happening in many cases in different ecosystems, then, well, you cannot predict when will happen the tipping point, but it's very likely. It's very likely. And I think all this heat wave in the marine systems of the Gorgonians, well, in the first heat wave, we probably will not disappear. But then you accumulate the second, the third, and the variation in the maybe a smaller heat wave produce bigger responses.
But this is the question, because you at the beginning we said that there is to some extent a disconnect between the theory and the empirical evidence, in the world of tipping points. And the big advantage of theory is that it potentially provides tools like early warning signals that you were describing. So really understanding to what extent the real world fits the theory, or to what extent, it is very important in this case, because it gives us tools to decide how close we are to decide, or to foresee how close we are to these potential tipping points. And this is, to some extent, I guess, also connected to the scale issue. You basically raised all the points for the dialogue already. And the scale issue, I think it's important because my understanding is that as we move towards larger scales that are maybe more, both in space and time, that are more connected in some ways, the likelihood of tipping points, or at least my impression is that it tends to decrease. But I'm not sure whether that's general, and then also this raises the point of what happens when we get to the level of the planet Earth, which is quite closed in many ways. So, I don't know, I would like to know your thoughts on this, whoever wants to.
Which is the question exactly?
So first of all, the question is, from your experiences in your different systems, this connection between the theory and the empirical evidence, do we really have evidence that the systems behave as the theory of critical systems predicts, or not?
Yeah, what I think thinking on terrestrial ecosystems is that this theory about the early warnings is hard to apply, because in many cases this evidence from the theory are found from modeling with a lot of iterations, and given the pace of the life history of, for instance, of the trees or even of grasses. That means a lot of iteration, that means a lot of yearly sequences, and that makes it difficult to find this early warning. Of course, now we have some tools that they may change the time by space. For instance, I'm thinking on remote sensing. Remote sensing is a revolution in terrestrial ecosystems and probably in aquatic as well. But in fact, the remote sensing data we have cannot move backwards a lot. So the temporal dimension cannot be well afforded yet. But in some way we can make some kind of this time, space by time. But I think that in terrestrial ecosystem, this early warning is more related to apply this theoretical concept that it has been quite demonstrated with models, but it's, let's say, it's like a kind of signal, but not clear evidences in my opinion in terrestrial ecosystems, because we don't have this sequence of slowing down to be checked and to be contrasted, because this is another thinking about the theory, that the resilience from the point of view of achieving this not coming back point means that you can only measure the resilience when you cannot do nothing, at least from the from the theoretical point of view. So you need to move about these inferred signals. But coming back to the terrestrial ecosystem, I will say that this theory is more inspiring than just providing real effective tools right now. Probably in the future will be. But perhaps I don't have all the information.
To be a bit polemic, I do not agree. I think it's possible now to try to predict and to warn about that, because as you said, with remote sensing, the amount of data is terrific. And then also the meteorological data, it's the data more available everywhere. So in some way, the terrestrial ecosystems are in a better position than marine ecosystems and freshwater ecosystems. And the issue is to select the variables, the key variables, the windows of observation, to select. You cannot address everything, to define the ecosystems in some way, but you have, forests, or you have vegetation maps, you have areas, but then most of the variables, probably state variables of ecosystems are highly correlated. So if you select good enough variables for the observation, the remote sensing and the meteorological stations provide millions of data to play with and analyze the patterns of variation. And it's the same as people, cardiologists, they study the wave and the variation in the wave and see the wave is changing, and resilience can be measured. Doesn't matter if you say it is resilient or not, but you can compare the perturbation and the response. And they agree or not agree. So
Jordi, what I mean is that right now we have not yet the empirical evidences of many of these tipping points in terrestrial ecosystems. But I agree that this, just let me know where it's published, because I check it and I didn't find very much, sure. Not yet. But of course, if the trend keeps on, we will have, and this remote sensing tool will provide. But what I say is that right now, the empirical evidences, at least at the temporal scale, are not provided. We can make some imaginative exercises to try this at the temporal scale. And what I mean saying that cannot be measured is just a theoretical exercise, in the sense that until something happens, you cannot measure. But you can infer, you can model. And this, for me, this is a weakness of the concept of the resilience for it's very useful as a heuristic concept. But in fact, you cannot measure something that doesn't exist, at least from the empirical point of view. From the theoretical, you can do. And until the system has not lost the state, you cannot say that it has lost the state.
Yeah, but in medicine, you lost the state when you die.
Exactly.
But then it's late. So you go to the medicine before dying, but then you go to another place.
So what I mean is that what you can do is to find things to promote resilience, but you strictly cannot measure this.
Promote and warn, if we talk about the point of view of applied things, it's the same as in health. You can warn, look, you have the cholesterol too high.
Just to finish, I fully agree from the practical point of view. Well, my comment was just absolutely theoretical.
Yeah.
No, I also think that we can warn before, we can get warning signals before reaching a tipping point. That I agree that it's theoretical because we want not to overpass it, to be dead. But yeah, in the marine system, of course, there are more challenges in terms of monitoring from remote sensing and so on, but there is a lot of, it has improved a lot, the technology to, to look at follow the ecosystems, and then all the oceanographic data that is also acquired by Copernicus and all these monitoring sites. So actually on the sea is also quite, it's improving a lot the monitoring capacity, and there are also these observations coupled with observations of really changes in these key ecosystems, or those that are monitored. I think there is evidence that that we can reach some change, and also I also agree that it's necessary to combine these observations to be able to do some predictions. That of course, for predictions we just need models and play with this. But I think that all these kinds of approaches are really complementary to define potential tipping points and not to prevent the overpassing them.
Okay, we have discussed many topics. Maybe something that has not been discussed explicitly is that we've talked quite a bit about resilience. Resilience is, to some extent, the other side of the coin of tipping points, no? But I think it's probably useful to think in terms of what mechanisms, what factors confer resilience, and to what extent they might be similar between the different systems you study. So I would like to know how, I mean, the order doesn't matter, whoever feels ready to answer, but I would like to know your view on the mechanisms and the factors that confer resilience in your systems.
May I start? Yeah, well, I fully agree with the approach of Jordi when addressing this, talking about the system properties related with the stocks, with fluxes, with feedbacks and this kind of regulations. And at least in terrestrial ecosystems, I think we are, at least in some fields, we are not very used to take this in usually. Probably this is more common in aquatic systems because the fluxes are more evident. Well, this is my opinion. Probably there are some fields in which they are important. In many cases, when we talk about the resilience in relation to these, let's say, extreme climatic events, just to broaden the scope of the head waves, if we talk about concepts like the role of biodiversity, about connectivity at landscape level, about the redundancy of functioning between the pieces, the different species, and several other issues. We can make a list, 5, 6, 7, 8 concepts of this, and well, we can find evidences that support this. For instance, biodiversity by complementary functional effects and etc., etc. But I think I will not do it right here. But I think we should make the effort to put these ideas, this mechanism, this process, to this systemic point of view. What really mean biodiversity when we think in fluxes, stocks, and regulations? What mean connectivity across landscape how we can translate this, because in many cases we have evidences, not full evidences, but partial evidences of some cases on some scales. How can we translate this mechanism to the systemic functioning? I think this is a challenge that we can do.
Yeah, well, I agree. I fully agree. And yeah, in the sea and especially the coastal waters, even Jordi was saying initially that this was colorful and so on. At the coastal zone, we can have a lot of impacts of humans also. So, for instance, in the frame of climate change, it's not only temperature that. To improve the resilience of the ecosystem, it's really important also that other conditions, ambient conditions are also in good state, because very often these heat waves is linked with problems with oxygen. Also, if there is eutrophication in the area, an excess of organic matter, this also, the warming increases the sulfide production, so this also makes the system to be really in bad condition. So this is only the abiotic issues, but then also all the biodiversity associated to the ecosystem is crucial. Like this maintaining, keeping the trophic chain structured, not that we have eliminated the predators and then we have all the grazers there. So there is a lot of other issues, other parameters or condition that really can enhance if we keep the system in good shape, it also means that all these other issues are controlled. And this is, I think, it's key to enhance the resilience of the system.
Yeah, just I mentioned before my opinion about this, but just to develop a bit more in freshwater ecosystems or continental waters, one key issue is to distinguish between the physical system and the biological system. If we consider the climate is the driver of the meteorology, the weather is the climate, the driver, sorry, then the physical, some of the impacts of changes or the contrary of the resilience of the system is provided by the physical systems. What I mean, for instance, the size of the water bodies, a small pond is easily heated, and whereas a large lake it's very difficult, and a small stream can dry out quickly. A large river takes longer. The fluctuations in temperature, because the heat capacity of water is higher. If you have a large water body or the marine system, so it takes longer. Now, for instance, an example of glaciers. Here, glaciers are something unusual, but they are parts of the world where a lot of the let's say landscape is related to glaciers. One key thing in the changes in glaciers is the connectivity between the tongue, when the glacier is just moving down, and the part that is feeding the glacier. And sometimes with heat wave, these are one of the few examples, this connectivity is broken. And when you get the usual weather, it doesn't recover. So all the aquatic systems related to these glaciers, and probably even terrestrial systems worse, change. So what's an important aspect to consider the role of the physical system. I remember for the first heat wave affecting Oregonians, you have the paradox of the stratification increases of the system, so the productivity of the system declines because you have less mixing and the nutrients and light are decoupled. And then the Gorgonians are in a higher temperature, so the metabolism increases, so the demand for food increases, and the supply for food declines. And this is just driven by the physical system, the reaction of the physical system, and is opposite to the needs of the biological system. So at least in aquatic ecosystems it's quite important, but the size of the system and the structure of the system. But I guess in terrestrial ecosystems also it happens, the big areas or the small areas.
See, for sure, but note that I fully agree, and the importance of the physical or chemical constriction of the abiotic part of the system are crucial. Particularly when you have a confined system. That is what happened with fresh water, that they are confined within the terrestrial. Yet, let me the simplification. That means that they are more sensitive to the size of in which this physical process happens. And when we move to the marine, in the case of the Gorgonia, that brings us to another important issue, that at the end, if we are talking about ecosystem is the combination of both physical and biotic factors. And what they eventually reflect is how the biological part are coupled with the resources that find in this physical environmental. When you find that the coupling is not working very well is when you have the big problems, because at the end, and the happiness of the life is to is to obtain the resources that are on different, especially sites that are determined by the physical environment. And this is absolutely key also in terrestrial ecosystems. But at the end is, of course, it's important the physical. In some cases are more when your system is more confined. That means that this is the health questions are more important. But at the end, as we are talking about the ecosystem, is this coupling between the physical and the biotic, because it's the whole system. And this, the essential that eventually bring us to the mechanism is how are the coupled, the places where you catch the different requirements. When I mean I mean living being.
Well, and also that it happens also at the coupling, or it's needed a coupling with all the biodiversity within the ecosystem.
Yeah, this is scaling, and this is scaling through space and through time, because sometimes if you have the mechanism to maintain the coupling because you have the stocks, okay, but if you don't have this capacity to remain the stock, you are more vulnerable to the temporal decoupling.
Good. So we are almost reaching the final part of this first part of the dialogue. Before we finish this part, I would like to make a very specific question to the three of you, which is just ask you to highlight one knowledge gap that you think we have in relation to tipping points and heat waves, ideally, or tipping points and climate change, if we want to be a bit more general in your respective systems. Just one, to have also material for further discussion. Well, if you want.
I can mention, well, probably there would be several, but I think one is, well, at least in my field or what I'm more related, we used to focus in like one driver of leading to this tipping point. And so actually, and we look for thresholds and so on, but probably these thresholds can change depending with the interactions with other conditions. So, for instance, with temperature, now with heat waves, we do a lot of focus. We have a lot of focus on assessing. Okay, the temperature is this, and then look for thresholds where the species collapse or the assemblages change. But maybe these thresholds, this temperature these temperature thresholds can be different depending maybe on oxygen availability, sulfite or organic matter deterioration, I don't know, nutrients, other parameters, and actually this is key. And also another thing is about all the issue with temperature, about the adaptation, local adaptation, that we do a lot of models, but it's with just one considering everything together.
Well, just to link your question with the previous issue of resilience, what provides resilience, I think there is the topic of biodiversity in the sense of the complexity of the composition of communities and the number of species and so on. And here the development of the theory of coexistence of the species I think is quite important, because well, basically the most simple theory distinguish between, well, if you cannot succeed by your fitness, then you succeed by your niche differentiation. And within this context, different responses to temperature is a way to differentiate the niche. And there start to be many examples that during heat wave, well, one, or if you analyze the optima or the tolerance to changes in temperature of close species, some of them differ a lot. So that the species that play in a minor role, they can compensate in extreme situations, compensate the role of the other. So, but this is quite, I think, quite naive, still quite naive, the real role of biodiversity and the real mechanisms providing resilience. But I think that because it's still naive, there is a lot of investigation to do in it.
Yeah, well, it's hard to choose one, but just to follow the thinking. There is a lot of effort in terrestrial ecosystems for large-scale monitoring, especially from the power of the remote sensing, and this is good. But I think that the challenge is to link this what Jordi mentioned about the role of biodiversity, because that may be easy to catch. Well, I know that there is a scale up of the process, and maybe biodiversity apparently is not so essential. But then we are thinking that these issues related with the resilience and the function of the system is the interactions are important. There are important biotic interactions in terms of community and functional roles, etc., and also interactions with the biotic. And there are some interactions that we had not go very into about, for instance, the role of antagonistic relationships and developing or promoting tipping points that in the case of terrestrial ecosystems there are evidence in that sense. So this link between this large-scale monitoring of large properties of the state and the biotic component of this, I think this is a challenge and we know about. But I think what it happens is that now the technological ability it's reinforcing this large scale, and that maybe, and on the other side we have that the technological ability is providing a lot of information about DNA and different omas, but we don't know exactly how these omas really constitute as a system. So I think the technology advances, but we need to put all of them really in a functional sense to link them.
Okay, thanks very much to the panelists. So I think we will move to the second phase of the dialogue, which will consist first. So we, as many of you know, we asked for questions before today. So several people sent questions to us that I will now make a selection of them, because of course many of the topics have already been discussed. Sorry if you sent a question and I am not selecting it. But we don't have time for everything. And also we will, after that, open a little bit the floor to questions here in the room, and also questions that are posed through the chat. Sergi tells me there is none so far, but if you have a question you didn't put before and you are following online, you still have the chance to put one. So, to begin, there are a couple of questions that are a bit more specific and specific to some of the systems. So maybe we can cover this briefly. One of them has to do with the response of forest ecosystems specifically to heat waves and what we know about this. And I guess that goes to Paco.
Oh yeah, Jordi, you are better than me to answer this, because then forests are mostly composed by trees. Well, we will say that they are defined by trees, and this is related with tree liver response on tree liver collapse to the heat waves, and you are perhaps you can say something more. Then we can scale up to the general forest, but just you can make the state of the art briefly.
Okay, I mean, I think I would rather prefer to keep, because, yeah, I mean, I've worked quite a bit on tree mortality, but I think that the nice thing here is to scale these up to the ecosystem, no? And then consider not only mortality, but the full demographic response. I guess this is what the person that asked this.
Okay, so then I can go. I think that here a key issue in forest ecosystems is that we have accumulated quite large evidence of the episodes, of course, they keep on working, and about the mechanisms they are involved from the physiology point of view to the interactions with another organisms, with management and so on. We don't know enough, of course, never know enough. But there is a lot of work on this, but there is not so much work about the consequences. And what I mean is not the short-term consequences. Okay, there is not leaf cover that produce change in the radiation balance and the water balance and so on. But if the forest then, this disturbance, in the sense that you have a mortality event, if the forest recover in a time that is the normal in a forest, let's say several years, a decade, maybe it was just one more disturbances within the regular dynamics of the forest. And even with the foresters, with the forest scientists, this debate exists, to which extent these events are really part of the in a broad sense dynamics of the forest. So I think that here we just start having some short-term information, but not the long-term dynamics of the forest. We can model it. We have made some exercises, but for me this is an issue in the sense. Okay, we can say that we have these forest mortality events, we can document them, we can study, in many cases we can, with more or less effort, we can attribute the causes, not very easily, but we can do a lot of things. But there is a challenge to know what really it represents for the forest ecosystems. And yes, what we have now are very partial information of short term. And what we are observing in forests at a broad scale is that, okay, in many cases the forests regrowth or can regrowth, have the potential to regrowth because trees are there. But in many cases, let's say half of the cases, just a round number, there is a replacement of the species that from one of these state variables of green canopy, it's maybe not very relevant, but it may be relevant for another processes. But even in what apparently is a low percentage of cases, let's say 10%, there is not short-term recovery of the forest because we don't see trees growing there. That gives us the insight that we may be moving to a non-forested system. You may say, okay, 10%. 10% is not very much. This is not very much for a single, but if you multiply this a long time, that is significant. And what is important is that probably what we are seeing in these forest episodes is a window to the future, because this is what's happening now. But if we assume that this is related to the climate, and the climate trend is what we know it is, so the future means that perhaps will be the rule.
Okay, thanks. And I guess a question for you, Nuria, that something we didn't cover, and I think is quite interesting. There is a question asking about the synergistic effects of heat waves and fishing. I guess in connection with the tipping points of the fishing itself.
Yeah. Okay. There is in the coral reef work. I'm not doing coral reefs, but okay, they are very charismatic. So and it's I mean they are really big, they are very much impacted, so it's important. Related with the fishing, well, it was when the first impacts were started to be documented. I think it was by the late 90s or begin the 2000. Well, it was also shown that the reefs were more resilient after the heat wave, so they recovered faster, or even they were able to recover in areas where the fish communities were there, so that there was not an overfishing, or at least the herbivorous fish were there. So the herbivorous fish were like eating the algae that were starting growing on top of the deteriorated reef. So it allowed recruitment of new corals. So this was really, it was very important, and well, not directly with heat wave, but for instance related with warming in the Mediterranean. There is well, it's in the Eastern Mediterranean, but well, there are fish, two species of fish, rabbit fish, that they are really voracious, and they were introduced through the Suez Canal, and so they come from warm waters, and they are spreading quite a lot in the Mediterranean. So far in the eastern, but well, we will see, and they are really, because they are proliferating a lot because they don't have predators and so on. So they are causing barrens of areas because they are eating. Well, they are devastating, consuming the algae that are on shore. So especially Cystoceria in this shallow. So yeah, it's one of these coupled impacts that we should manage.
Thank you. And now a question for you, Jordi. There is one of our colleagues asking about what is known about the buffering capacity of inland freshwater systems for heat waves, specifically.
Yes, well, buffering depends on the size of the system, and also we know that the heat capacity of water is higher than the air, so in principle, always the effects on ecosystems, aquatic ecosystem, are initially smaller, or the fluctuations are different from the terrestrial ecosystems. But then beyond that, well, there is little knowledge exactly how to link or how the heat wave are connected to other drivers of aquatic ecosystems, mainly the nutrient cycling and as I said, the structures of the system. And here there is a lot to study. I talk a lot about lakes because are my field, but the important aquatic ecosystems, continental aquatic ecosystems, are rivers and streams, and they play a key role of connectivity with other systems. And for instance, one nice example is in Yangtze River, that heat wave in the continent are transferred to the marine system because the warming of the water, and this water then have a lower density and changes the circulation in front of the coast of China, and changes, when you change the circulation, changes everything. So all these aspects of connectivity of the aquatic system, of continental aquatic systems with marine systems, the dependence with terrestrial vegetation, the state of this vegetation, I think is one issue that merits investigation, and not only the physical aspects, but also the biological aspects. Well, if you warm water, most of the organisms living there do not regulate temperature, so they accelerate the metabolism, and that produces usually, well, if they have food, an increase in growth, but also sometimes increase in maturity. So now there start to be studies that, for instance, in nematodes, they see that they increase the metabolism, the maturity, but they have less eggs because the maturity is achieved sooner, and they have smaller eggs. So what seems to be positive in one way, because if you increases let's say the growth dynamics in pure matter fluxes, then in terms of demography could be a problem. So all these truly biological responses, there is an enormous field there to study. I know an example from amphipods from marine coast, where during the heat wave, the parasites, usually all the communities have some level of parasitism that is in a kind of a steady state. So during warmings or heat wave, the parasites activity increases more than the host. So there is a success for that, and a mess for the amphipods. So the life is so complex and so interesting that well, there are as many issues as you want to study. But I think a general approach, although we have to build let's say a general knowledge, the approach in practice needs to consider case by case, because all these interactions between different factors, and so that usually depends on understanding the case. I repeat the analogy with medicine. You can build a general knowledge of medicine, but then you treat each person in a different way, in a singular way, and you analyze this person as a given case, not an example for the theory, but with interest for the person. So we need to have interest for the ecosystem-specific case.
Yeah, I fully agree, but following up with the medicine example, I agree, the doctor is the care of each of us, but there is also something that is the public health that is related with this. And this is an example from, let's say, not the theory, but this conceptual level, of this statistical level, of this organization level, and the relationships with the local examples. And this is part of our exercise, as in the case of the health, to link the public health with the exercise of taking care of persons, no? Of people. And if I can go back to the question before about heat and drought, probably I didn't address very well the question. If the question was related with heat and drought in terrestrial ecosystems, and particularly in forests, yeah, now we are more trained to include both terms, because these climatic events in fact implies the combination of slow water availability and high temperatures. So this is the main reason. So probably it's hard to say only heat. Of course, we have cases in which a heat wave of few days or few weeks produce a defoliation in forests, and we can find some examples here in Garrocha, for instance, several years ago. So that, yeah, it exists. But I think that just to afford the question, we are here is the combination of both. And just let me give an example of also, again, the concept of the interactions of the scale up, because an extreme case of extreme heat wave is a wildfire. Let me be a little bit bizarre in this sense, but yeah, it is, and both may be connected. You have a climatic heat wave that produce conditions in which, with the interaction with other elements, we produce this another issue that is wildfire. What I mean is that, coming back to the role of interactions, we can talk about heat wave and climatic events, tipping points, and we have talked about these biotic interactions, but there are also these interactions with legacies, with other processes, with other even disturbances. And this is, this extreme example I said, how wildfires may be also related with heat waves, even from a conceptual point of view.
Okay. Something I wanted to ask, because there are several people pointing in that direction, was related to the connection between the different subsystems, but you actually covered part of subsystems, meaning the terrestrial, the freshwater, the inland waters, etc. You covered this to some extent. So I think I will move to a final question of the ones that were submitted before today, which is very general, so feel free to answer whoever feels that wants to answer, and it's about the role of citizen science. So how could citizen science be used to generate empirical evidence? No, we were saying at the beginning we need long time series, we need data in many cases. To what extent engaging the citizen to get this data is feasible? It's a good idea. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to make the people be aware of the situation, and also as a participant of doing in this part the monitoring. And well, for instance, in the marine area, there is a very nice platform that it's led by the Institut de Ciències del Mar, that it's called Observadors del Mar. There are many scientists and people involved in different institutes and so on, and I think this works quite well. Of course, it needs a lot of effort, but I think I think it's a very good initiative, and actually it provides data. Of course, it has to be validated and goes through a process, but well, I think it's a good way to get observation, or to have observations, and also to involve everybody, that it's not a thing only for researchers or universities and so on, so to make actually everybody involved.
Any other comment, or shall we move to the questions from the audience?
One, I thought that you were going to ask about something to relate the different systems, terrestrial, freshwater, and so on. I think we made many theoretical comments about that, but I think that what put together all three systems are we, humans. So probably what is right now, what is particularly relevant, linking the different types of ecosystems are humans, so human citizens. If we provoke the current situation, so any of these activities is welcome to revert at some extent the situation. Citizen science, I think it covers at least two main roles. One is the conscience, the participation of the people to know the problem and to be closer to the problem. Another is to provide information to support, improve the knowledge. Both are important and both are possible. And the second one is particularly important, the link with scientists. And we have very, very, very nice exercises in which this happens. For instance, in the case of terrestrial ecosystem, I mentioned the need to link this large monitoring with local knowledge of biodiversity, with elements that are there. And this needs a lot of what we classically say field work, and that may be a nice exercise for the citizen science. Of course, we can have citizen science multiplying the computers, doing monitoring and so on, but I like more this opportunity people to go to the field.
Little to say, but if you want, I say something, but it's not necessary.
There is no need. Okay, good. So I think that we can move to the questions by the audience and also by the remote audience, if there is any. Not yet. Okay. So if you that are following the debate online want to make questions, please use the chat. And for those that are here, that's the opportunity for you to ask something to our panel. Thanks.
Okay, Thanks very much for the discussion. It was really good. I'd like to sort of go right back to the beginning in terms of defining the tipping point question again. I sort of feel if we had a physical definition of what a tipping point was that was consistent across disciplines, then this would kind of facilitate research and our understanding of the systems in of themselves. So we discussed the importance of scaling, temporal and spatial scaling, and that's interesting. Another aspect is sort of magnitude of the event versus the irreversibility of the event or reversibility. So like tipping point sort of implies that the system is transitioning to a different state. And so therefore, what is the difference between a disturbance and a transition? And so if I may slightly build on that point with respect to what some of you have said, is that, Jody made the point that that there's tons of data now, environmental data, and we're getting more data from sensing, and we're getting better capacity to analyze it in terms of sort of AI and computer learning and so on. In my view, I think that's instrumental and could be really valuable in predicting the response of complex systems. But it doesn't provide any information, so this is the initial response. So in the context of forests, for example, if you have a mortality event, I think we might get quite good at predicting the occurrence of a mortality event. But what comes next is the recovery, whether the system can recover, and for that you need the theory, which is what Paco was saying. And so without the theory, I think we can't actually anticipate whether it's a tipping point or just a disturbance event. So the main question is, how do we incorporate this idea of the magnitude of the event versus the irreversibility of the event? And to anyone who can say anything.
You are absolutely right. We didn't have time, let's say, or we didn't realize to mention about that. We are talking that this is an important element, is the magnitude of the event that is bringing to the tipping point. But note that there are two approaches. You may have a statistical approach in the sense to see which is the magnitude in a statistical series to identify if they are bringing to a tipping point. You may have another approach is when you have the tipping point to see which was the magnitude. Maybe this second one seems not so fine statistically, but heuristically it's interesting to think about. So you have the two ways to afford the question of the magnitude. Other ways, if you are following just the statistical, this is a statistical, and then you decide which is the threshold to define a magnitude. So things to think about. And you are absolutely right that a key point that we have not enough elements is just about how to forecast how will be the recovery in the case of the forest and probably in some other cases. Again, this is a point of the scale of what Jordi said about the state variables you are considering. Maybe we can I'm not sure, but probably we can predict or forecast this for broad level of organization properties like canopy, but not so much about another properties that may be related with biodiversity. And then the link between them is where we are absolutely missing. But yeah, there is a lot of things to think about. Just that was hype. But probably Jordi has something to say about this.
Well, I wanted, because we were high conditioned by the title, the high heat wave. But theoretically, the interesting aspect of tipping points is that they occur in a situation where you don't have really perturbations, but you have, let's say, a smooth change in the driver that is progressing smoothly. And then at some point, suddenly you have a big change in the system. That is an interesting tipping point, because usually, if a rock is dropping on me, that is an issue of resistance, not of no resilience, the challenge is to identify when in a continuous tendency, which obviously is always oscillating a bit, then you could find a big change. We had recently a a case study, a real situation in one lake in Spain, in Sanabria, in the largest lake in Spain, where the precipitation in the catchment, in the area, is declining. But it's declining from 2,000 millimeters to about 6,000, 7,000. So it really is not a problem of the volume of water for the lake. And unfortunately, in this lake, there was a monitoring. Now it's about 40 years old. And during 25 lakes, was something like that. It's an oligotrophic lake. Nothing happened. And suddenly, one year, there was a bloom, enormous bloom. You can see the. And that was an alarm about that. What is happening? Because there were not nutrient changes in the catchment, in small catchment, little populated, no industry, nothing changing. And basically, it's an example of this response, this unexpected response, and because was an alarm, a public alarm about that. There was a specific study. And then during the study, 2 years later than the first bloom, another big bloom happened. And we studied the time series. And we found that before the bloom, this correlation and the change in variation start to happen in chlorophyll and oxygen in the bottom. So we predict that there was a change in the regime shift. We said that there was a regime shift, and the lake was moving to another state. And this prediction until now is correct. So after 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 now, the levels of chlorophyll are still high. And the mechanism was basically the capacity of recycling the same external nutrient load was recycled better within the lake. So with the same external input of nutrients, you achieve higher productivity in the lake. And this is, let's say, natural. The only thing changing is the precipitation. What I mean with all that, or maybe I have been too long, but we have to take care about the impacts of perturbation and the regime shift driven by a change in the general context of the probability density of the drivers.
Okay, is there any other question from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks to the organizers. It was a very interesting discussion. I wanted to ask the panel which are the lessons learned in this long history of studying and monitoring ecosystems. No, tipping points is an inherent property of complex systems. No, and it's probably taking a lot of attention now because we're seeing more of this happening in the present climate situation. So which are the lessons learned from this long history of studying ecosystems regarding tipping points that can be applied to forecast and manage ecosystems in a more in a way we can enhance conservation, no? Maybe we can link it to the previous question, no, regarding the description of what's a tipping point and the occurrence of feedbacks. No, in the marine realm, which is my topic, Nuria mentioned. No, there's not many long-term monitoring. If we're really lucky if we have 10, 20 years, 30 years time, but some sort of people manage to find space for times of substitution, evidences of bee stability, and describe, for instance, what Nuria was saying, no? alternative stable states in coral reef and the transition between a healthy coral reefs to a degraded state and so on. So I'm wondering which are the lessons we can take in order to provide new opportunities for conservation, no? Moving from the collapse theory to solving some of the problems in the practical term. Sorry.
Wants to take the floor?
I think that when it's slowly and the evidence it's what it is, but I think the identification of these tipping points or and indicators that guide us to identify them, I think they are really useful to at least to act to some extent, to do some intervention in the ecosystem. And for instance, now I'm also thinking about, it's related also to these changes, for instance, from looking at the landscape, the organization, the structures, patterns on the landscape, for instance, in the seagrasses. I'm coming from the seagrass wall. We see, of course, this is with the help of models, because it's all this recovery and all these dynamics are very slow, and that we are not able to see things on our lifetime, more or less. So I think the models are really helpful, linked to the observations, the field observations. But really. So depending on the balance of mortality, the demographic balance of the seagrass meadows in terms of shoots or the landscape goes through different organizations. So from continuous meadow structures like patches or holes or rings, and then the final collapse. That this has been described also in the terrestrial vegetated systems. And so, and then just looking at the balance, the demographic balance, we may, seeing the structure, the pattern, the landscape, we may then, we may assign a balance of this mortality, so we can see how much is the pressure on that system. So we can identify how far we are or how close we are to the final disappearance of the landscape. So I think that this is to identify these key the tipping points or these thresholds are useful, but it's really hard, or it's a challenge to identify them. But maybe in the others have other opinions.
May I add something? This point of space for time, it's very interesting. It's something that we have not touched, and I think it's more important than sometimes we think, because when you compare the distributions of organisms across the space, one finds thresholds in these distributions. So we can assume that these thresholds sometimes are difficult to explain physiologically or any other, but at the end should reflect the evolutionary history. So we can assume that if this happened in time, that this threshold is reached by the system, there will be a huge change, because this is something that have a long evolutionary history of interactions between the communities, at least within some clades. So I think, it's quite good that you have raised this point of space for time substitution as an approach for when you don't have long time series.
Okay, we have time for a final question. Who wants to take the opportunity? Jaume?
Okay, thank you for this act. I think that some attempts have been made to relate cascading local extinctions to the time that most species have been in this ecosystem out of the limits of their distribution, virtual or real areas. Do you think that this can aid to predict the tipping points in this ecosystem, in any ecosystem?
You're right. We didn't address the point of the tipping points in trophic organization levels. We're more talking about the biophysical, but you're right. These tipping points may also occur within the biotic systems. But so you're absolutely right, and these cascading effects are important. We mentioned how these biodiversity interactions eventually can scale up to biophysical or more physical properties. But if the question is that we think that species in the limit situation from the requirements of the climatic requirements, we are within this climate context, are more vulnerable right now. What I will say is, species that are in close to the limits of the tolerance, of the climatic tolerance, they are more vulnerable. But species that historically have been living in good conditions, good climatic conditions, they are also vulnerable. This is what we are learning, because it was from the niche theory itself. The expected pattern was that you are close to the limit if the environment change and move outside your limits, you will be outside. This is theory, and this is the theory, and we empirically see that it happens. These species, but in some cases, these species are also well trained, are adapted, or have evolved to these conditions. So they have some, a small change or a change outside the official limits. Maybe it's not so critical. And what we are seeing is that the species that historically haven't been living in good conditions, probably they are maladapted. They are not very well adapted to these extreme situations, and they are also vulnerable. That's maybe a message that could be done. Also relating to the first question, is that what we say is that even those species that apparently they are well suited to the conditions they were living, they also are vulnerable. And of course, these cascading effects may occur.
Okay, I think it's time to close this event. I will not try to summarize all that has been said. I think that were many interesting ideas. Just to highlight one that I thought is quite important is this. Well, maybe two very briefly. One is the importance that actually we always have many drivers at the same time, and this is maybe something against our own title. And it's impossible to understand what happens without considering them simultaneously. I think that's something we know. And then a second element is the importance of really connecting scales in time and space. And this many times involves understanding, as it has been highlighted several times, stocks and fluxes of matter, energy, etc. And I think that this is really connected with the heart of what ecology was thinking about maybe 60s, 70s, 80s. So it has a lot to do with dynamic thinking, dynamic systems theory, etc. And I have the feeling that even if, of course, there is still a lot of people working on those areas, there has been some loss of interest in. I mean, they are no longer in the center of what ecology does in many aspects. And my feeling is that to really make progress with tipping points and alternative states and all these type of analysis, we really need to go back to this type of thinking. And this also means that we need to cross scales, because these feedback loops don't know about our distinction between terrestrial, freshwater, or marine. So I think that really connects with the need to events like this one, that really put together people, ecologists working in different systems and at different scales. And basically with this, I hope this will be the first of a successful series of dialogues in ecology organized by SIBECOL. I would like to thank again the Autonomous University of Barcelona for hosting the event, CREAF for providing support, and of course our panelists and you, the audience. Thanks very much.
A la tele hi ha una llumeta vermella.